my sister, forced me to fund her wedding, then mocked me as pathetic. I canceled every vendor. She stormed my house, screaming I'd ruined her life. Claudia, my younger sister, chose me as her maid of honor when she got engaged last year. But instead of wedding styles, she emailed me the pricing of her bridesmaid dresses. Instead of wedding themes, she texted me the cost of her dream venue, complete with cheerful emojis. She ignored every question I asked that wasn't, "Where do I swipe my card?" She read and signed every planning email with, "Thanks for handling the payment." The pattern began early when Claudia said she was too stressed out about the wedding to handle vendor contracts. So, naturally, I put everything in my name and paid the deposit because she was my sister. Then, she insisted that I shed £10 to avoid ruining images as she ate the pricey cake samples I had paid for. At the dress fitting, she informed the seamstress that I looked like a cow in the maid of honor gown and forced me to spend more for a more expensive one to reduce my size. Then she tweeted on social media about her charity case maid of honor as if I were some needy single loser she was doing a favor by. Including. Still, I assumed she was just overwhelmed, and since I could afford it, I decided there was nothing wrong with giving my sister her dream wedding. However, she eventually exposed her genuine motives. 4 weeks before the wedding, I traveled to her apartment for the final planning meeting, carrying all of the vendor contracts in my folder. Since I needed to make the final payments, I arrived early and was going to knock on her door when I overheard her on speakerphone with the other bridesmaids, and my heart fell. Don't worry, I only made her maid of honor for the money. She'll probably ruin my wedding photos by being that ugly. Just looking at her pathetic face makes me sick. I'm dropping her as maid of honor soon, but she's so desperate for family approval that she won't even complain. When I tell her, my hand literally froze on the doorknob. A few seconds later, after I'd regulated my breathing, I opened the door, and Claudia's expression changed to one of artificial sweetness the moment she noticed me standing there. "Oh, hey. So I've been thinking and you'd be more comfortable just attending as a regular guest, right? My wedding photos need a certain aesthetic. Hopefully you'll do just this one thing for your sister." I glanced at her perfectly contoured face and felt something inside me crack clean in half. Of course I understand perfectly. I lied, telling her I needed to process the change, and walked directly to my car, leaving her smiling after me. If she didn't want me there, I wouldn't be there, nor would my money. The venue deposit was in my name. The photographer used my credit card, and the flowers, decorations, and food all required my signature because she had been too busy to handle them. The cancellation policies all provided for full refunds, if made 3 weeks or more before the event, and we had 4 weeks. And guess what? All of the contracts were already in my hand. That afternoon, I went home and sat at my kitchen table, the contracts laid out like a deck of cards. My hands shook as I contacted the venue first, but my voice remained firm as I stated that my family circumstances had changed and that I needed my deposit refunded immediately. The photographer, florist, decorator, and caterer have all confirmed cancellations and reimbursements after I gave them 4 weeks' notice. With each call, I felt the weight of her words press against my chest, reminding myself why I was doing this. She had cheated me, depleted my bank account while telling everyone I was miserable, and intended to humiliate me at the wedding I had paid for. By the evening, I had regained hundreds of dollars and felt absolutely hollow. 3 days passed in silence as I awaited the inevitable detonation. When my phone rang with Claudia's number, I took a big breath and answered. "The venue says we don't have a booking. What did you do? The wedding is in 4 weeks. Nothing is booked, no photographer, no flowers, nothing." Her voice cracked with hysteria. As reality dawned on her, I informed her that I was now a frequent guest and that guests should not have to pay, so I canceled everything. She exploded with sobbing and screaming about how I was a jealous monster who had ruined her life. For nothing. Then she told me I was not invited to a wedding that was no longer scheduled. I began giggling and she hung up. Our parents called, outraged. But when I emailed screenshots and explained what I'd overheard, their rage subsided into an uncomfortable silence. That's when my sister made the decision to go nuclear. She screamed, "Screw her wedding," and started walking right to where I was. I heard her car before I saw her, the familiar growl of her engine rushing down my neighborhood at double the speed limit. My fists grabbed the kitchen counter as I looked out the window. Claudia's white vehicle sped into my driveway, leaving tire marks on the concrete. She jumped out without even closing the door. Holding her wedding planning binder in one hand and her phone in the other, the beating on, my door began quickly with full-fisted smashes that rocked the frame. I counted to 10, then 20, trying to control my breathing through the peephole. I could see her face distorted with wrath, mascara dripping down her cheekbones. I opened the door just as she lifted her fist for another attack on it. She stumbled forward and caught herself on the door frame. The binder dropped, spilling papers all over my porch. Wedding inspiration photographs, vendor lists and fabric swatches were strewn in the wind. She rushed past me into my house without my permission, her shoes clicking on the hardwood floors. I followed her into the living room where she swung around and jabbed her finger into my chest. Her voice moved quickly, spewing out phrases about deposits, contracts, and how I had ruined everything. I maintained a neutral attitude, allowing her to exhaust herself when she eventually paused for breath. I stepped into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. She followed, still shouting. I sipped gently, watching her move back and forth across my kitchen like a confined animal. Her neatly groomed hair was falling undone with blonde strands sticking to her tear-stained cheeks. She grabbed my shoulders and shook me. I cautiously laid down my glass and removed her hands. She tried again, pushing me against the refrigerator. I sidestepped and she stumbled into the counter. The fruit bowl wobbled but did not fall. Her phone vibrated. She grasped it and her face turned paler. I could guess what she was reading. Probably another vendor confirming the cancellation. She tossed her phone toward the wall. It bounced off and clattered to the ground. The screen fractured but still glowed. She lunged at my purse on the counter, spilling its contents everywhere. Lipstick rolled behind the stove. Receipts flew to the ground and my wallet landed near her feet. She grabbed it, eagerly pulling out my credit cards as if they had some magical solution to her problem. First carefully picked up each item and returned them to my purse as she waved my cards around. When I reached for them, she lifted them above her head like a child playing keep away. I moved into the living room and sat down, leaving her alone in my kitchen with my credit cards. She followed and threw the cards at me. They had dispersed across the coffee table. I took them one by one and checked them for damage before returning them to my wallet. She stared, her chest heaving with every breath. Her phone rang on the kitchen floor. She scrambled for it, almost tripping on her heels. I heard her respond, her voice changing to a phony softness. Probably our mother. The conversation was brief. When she returned to the living room, her face had taken on a calculating expression that I recognized all too well. She sat opposite from me, straightening off her skirt and tucking her hair behind her ears. The transition was remarkable, from wildeed wrath to composed manipulation in seconds. She bent forward, hands joined as if in prayer, and her voice became gentle and regretful. She discussed wedding stress, how she hadn't meant what she said, and how sisters should encourage one another. I observed her performance, noting how she kept looking at her phone, perhaps calculating how much time she had to save her wedding. When weeping did not help, she changed tactics. She reminded me of childhood memories, of promises we made as small girls, to be each other's maid of honor. She even took out her phone and showed me old images of us playing dress-up in our mother's wedding attire. I stood and walked to the window, watching the neighbors' children play in their yard. She followed, still speaking. Her reflection in the glass revealed her increasing desperation. We both realized she was running out of tactics. The phone rang again. This time it was her fiancé, Daniel. I could hear his perplexed voice through the speaker as she attempted to explain why their venue had called regarding the cancellation. She gave me a furious glare as she fabricated tales about a miscommunication and a technological glitch. After she hung up, the mask fell completely. She snatched a pillow off my couch and tossed it against the wall. Then another. I kept a safe distance from her while she had a tantrum. When she reached for my grandmother's vase, I moved forward and grabbed it from her, carefully placing it on a high shelf. She collapsed on my couch, sobbing profusely. This time she shed real tears, but not because she was sad, but because she was frustrated that her plots were failing. I sat in the armchair across from her, waiting for the storm to clear. Her phone buzzed with text messages, wedding guests inquiring about the site, her fiancé wanting answers, and our parents attempting to mediate. Each message seemed to stoke her rage more. She stood hastily, wobbling slightly on her heels. She marched inside my home office, and I followed. She yanked open drawers, perhaps looking for copies of the contracts. Claudia's actions makes me wonder if there is something more going on here. The way she transitions from Wrath to manipulation to tears feels like she's going through every technique she knows. I leaned against the door frame, watching her search through my files. Tax returns were scattered around the floor. Old birthday cards flew like butterflies. When she didn't find anything useful, she switched to my computer. She pushed past me to the desk and frantically clicked through my email. I reached over and quietly shut the laptop. She wanted to open it again, so I unplugged it and tucked it under my arm. Her face became an awful shade of red. She scooped everything off my desk, including pencils, paper clips, and a smashed coffee mug on the floor. I cautiously stepped across the porcelain shards and returned to the living room, laptop still safely under my arm. She followed, taking a different strategy. She brought out her checkbook and waved it at me. She promised to repay me every penny with interest. She even began writing a check, her hand shaking so much that the numbers were hardly discernible. I didn't reach for the check when she held it out. It fluttered to the ground between us. She wrote another, this time for twice the amount. That one joined the first on the ground. By the fifth check, she was crying again, mascara running down her cheeks. Daniel, her fiancé, arrived and pounded on my door with the same vehemence Claudia had displayed before. I saw his car parked crookedly behind Claudia's with one wheel on my yard. Claudia dashed to let him in before I could react. He stormed in, still wearing his work clothes, his face flushed with rage. He stared between us, attempting to grasp the situation. Claudia immediately went into victim mode, clinging to his arm and screaming about how I ruined their wedding out of jealousy. I stayed seated, letting her tell her story. When she finished, breathless and in tears, he looked to me for my interpretation. I just inquired whether he understood why Claudia had appointed me maid of honor. His puzzled expression spoke it all. Claudia tightened her grip on his arm. She tried to guide him toward the door, talking about the need to locate new vendors and how they could still save everything if they acted quickly. He refused, staring at me with rising distrust. I took out my phone and showed him my bank statements, including the thousands I'd spent on deposits and preparation. His eyes opened at the figures. Claudia reached for my phone, but he held her back, questioning why her sister had paid for everything. The gaps in her story grew wider. She stuttered about shared accounts and incomprehensible payment schedules. He demanded to view her bank statements. She claimed her phone was dead, despite the fact that we had all heard it ring only minutes before. He sat firmly on my couch, his head in his hands. Claudia crouched beside him, massaging his back and giving me angry looks over his shoulder. I excused myself to clean up the broken cup in my office, allowing them to converse. I could hear their voices in the other room, his getting louder with each query and hers getting shriller with each fib. When I returned with a dustpan full of porcelain pieces, he was standing by the door holding the car keys. He apologized to me before departing, his displeasure visible in every line on his face. Claudia dashed after him, her heels clicking wildly on my driveway. I observed from the window, as they argued beside his car, her motions becoming increasingly urgent as he backed away from her contact. He drove away, leaving her standing in my driveway. She returned to the house, her face a mask of absolute fury. Before she could get to the door, I locked it. She pounded again, yelling threats about litigation, police, and family loyalty. I drew the blinds and began cleaning up the mess she had left in my living room. Outside, her cries dwindled into whimpers, then silence. When I looked out an hour later, her automobile had vanished, but the tire prints remained on my driveway like scars. My phone was buzzing with texts from family members, everyone taking sides or demanding explanations. I switched it off and ate dinner alone at my kitchen table, where I had just set out those contracts and made the most difficult decision of my life. As night fell, I double-checked all of my locks and windows. I knew it was not over. Claudia had lost her wedding, potentially her fiancé, and certainly her influence over me. Tomorrow would bring more conflicts, manipulations, and attempts to break me down. But tonight, in my quiet house, with her pandemonium finally gone, I felt something I had not felt in months. Peace, the type that comes from sticking up for yourself, even if it means witnessing your sister's actual character in all of its hideous brilliance. I poured myself a cup of tea and sat in my armchair where I'd watched her rant from. Tomorrow would bring its own issues, but tonight I was free. The morning brought exactly what I was expecting. My doorbell rang at 7 and I looked through the peephole to see my mother, Anna, standing there with her arms crossed. Behind her, my father, Peter, shifted his weight from foot to foot, evidently uneasy. I opened the door and stood aside to allow them enter. My mother marched straight into the living room and perched on the edge of the couch, clutching her handbag in her lap. My father followed more slowly, his gaze drawn to the strewn wedding images that remained on my floor after Claudia's. Fury. He bent to pick one up and studied it with a scowl. I made coffee while they were settling in. When I returned, with 3 mugs, my mother had settled into what I recognized as her lecture stance. I brought them their drinks and sat across from them to wait. My mother delivered a lecture about family loyalty and forgiveness. She discussed how weddings brought out the worst in people, how Claudia was under enormous stress, and how I needed to be the bigger person. I sipped my coffee and let her words wash over me, noting how she avoided criticizing the money I'd spent or Claudia's nasty comments. When she eventually halted, I took out my phone and played the tape I had taken of Claudia's talk with the bridesmaids. When Claudia said my name, I started recording through the door, a habit I developed over the years. My mother's face palled as Claudia's words filled the room, calling me weak and unattractive, and laughed about exploiting me for money. My father laid down his drink with trembling hands. He stood and walked towards the window, his back to us. My mother repeatedly opened and closed her mouth, searching for words to defend her younger daughter. Finally, she took a different approach, implying that Claudia hadn't meant it, and that people occasionally say things they don't intend. Next, I showed them my bank statements, which revealed that I had spent thousands of dollars on deposits, dress fittings, cake tastings, and planning sessions. My father turned from the window, his expression solemn as he scanned the numbers. My mother's defense of Claudia weakened with each receipt I presented. They left an hour later, with my mother still making half-hearted attempts to make peace, and my father remaining grimly silent. I knew they'd head directly to Claudia's flat. I knew my mother would try to rectify this, as she had with every other mess Claudia had made over the years. The remainder of the morning passed pleasantly. I tidied up the debris of yesterday's pandemonium, vacuumed the scattered documents, and attempted to restore order in my home. Around lunchtime, my phone began humming with notifications. Claudia took to social media. The first post occurred in her wedding planning group. She portrayed herself as the victim of an envious sister who destroyed her dream wedding out of vengeance. She said I stole her deposits, canceled her venue contracts, and ruined her life because I couldn't bear to see her happy. Within minutes, strangers were leaving comments, expressing compassion and calling me nasty names. The following post went to her personal page, which was viewable to all of our mutual friends and extended family. This one includes meticulously cropped screenshots of our text chats, stripped of all context to make it appear as if I had canceled everything without provocation. She tagged our relatives, aunts, uncles, and family acquaintances to maximize awareness for her version of events. My phone constantly rang. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years called for explanations. My Aunt Helena, my mother's sister, left a voicemail accusing me of being selfish and unkind. My Uncle Marcus wrote me a lengthy text message expressing his disappointment with my behavior. Each message felt like extra weight on my chest. I spent the afternoon preparing a response. I compiled the entire text discussion, bank statements, and audio recording of Claudia's harsh words. First created a precise timeline of events, noting every payment I paid and every insult I received. However, when I tried to upload it, I hesitated. Do I really want everyone to see our family's dirty laundry? While I was debating, Claudia intensified. She set up a GoFundMe page called Help Me Save My Dream Wedding after my sister's betrayal. The description depicted a heartbreaking story of a bride devastated by her envious sister's actions. She stated she needed $18,000 to rebook everything with only 3 weeks till the wedding date. The donations began instantly. $40 from a high school classmate, $100 from a CO worker, and $30 from someone I didn't recognize. Each gift included a statement supporting Claudia and denouncing me. My gut churned as I saw the total grow. I finally responded, but it was too late. Claudia's narrative had already taken hold. My well-documented proof was dismissed as futile attempts to defend my violence. People accused me of creating the recording, manipulating the bank statements, and being a bitter spinster who couldn't bear her younger sister's happiness. That evening, Claudia's fiancé, Daniel, arrived at my door again. This time he arrived alone and seemed fatigued. I allowed him in and offered him a beverage, which he gratefully accepted. Nothing says family. Meeting like parents arriving at dawn with their disappointment loaded and ready to go. The recording trick was excellent. Nothing can break through parental denial faster than hearing their precious child's genuine voice on speaker. We sat silently in my living room for a few minutes before he spoke. He told me about his chats with Claudia. After she left yesterday, how she altered her story several times, how the details didn't fit up, and how she finally acknowledged to having me pay for items, but said it was because I offered. He asked to hear the recording. Again, I played it for him, watching his face fall as he learned his fiancée's genuine sentiments about me. When it was over, he sat in silence for a while. He then demanded to view the bank statements. I showed him everything, including the receipts from the dress fitting where Claudia insulted me. He left an hour later, taking copies of everything. I didn't inquire what he intended to do with them. That was between him and Claudia, but I could tell from the look in his eyes that something basic had changed in his perception of her. The next morning, I discovered my automobile had been vandalized. Someone had keyed long scrapes on both sides and destroyed one of the tail lights. My neighbor came over as I was standing in my driveway, marveling at the damage. She'd noticed an automobile matching Claudia's description in the early morning hours, but couldn't get a good look at the driver. I submitted a police report, understanding that no action would be taken until there was proof. The officer took photos and issued me a case number for my insurance. As he went, several other neighbors approached, having heard about the vandalism. They produced security camera footage from their homes, one of which captured a partial license plate that looked very similar to Claudia's. While dealing with the insurance company, I received a phone call from the wedding location. The manager indicated that someone, pretending to be me, had attempted to rebook the original reservation. They'd been skeptical because the caller didn't have the confirmation number and became angry when asked. They wanted to make sure I hadn't changed my mind about the cancellation. I stated that the cancellation was final and thanked them for checking. After hanging up, I called all of the other vendors to warn them about possible impersonation attempts. Unsurprisingly, the photographer and caterer had received similar calls. The florist stated that someone had showed up in person pretending to be my assistant, but fled when questioned for identification. That afternoon, a process server arrived at my door. Claudia was suing me for the wedding expenses, saying I had verbally agreed to pay for everything as a present, before intentionally withdrawing my support. The complaint sought $32,000 in deposits, emotional pain, and loss of marriage chance. I sat at my kitchen table looking at the legal documents. This was getting worse than I could have anticipated. I assumed that canceling the contracts would put an end to my involvement, but Claudia seems intent to ruin me for daring to oppose her. I spent the entire looking up lawyers, and eventually found one who specialized in family issues. We planned a consultation for the following day. As I gathered my papers, I realized I had been unwittingly planning for this possibility all along. Every receipt saved, every discussion documented, and every hurtful word preserved. My phone rang late at night. It was Daniel. His voice sounded empty when he informed me that he had ended the engagement. He presented Claudia with the facts and she finally revealed her real colors, shouting at him about how he was ruining everything just like I had. He had moved out of their apartment and was staying with friends. After we hung up, I sat in the dark contemplating this development. Part of me felt bad about my role in destroying their relationship, but the greater portion remembered Claudia's statements about manipulating me, thinking I was pathetic, and plotting to humiliate me. I didn't compel her to be cruel. I had simply stopped enabling it. The following several days blurred together. The lawyer evaluated my case and advised me that Claudia's claim had little merit based on the documentation I presented. She assisted me in filing a countersuit for defamation based on Claudia's social media posts and the GoFundMe hoax. We also sought a restraining order due to the vandalism and impersonation efforts. Meanwhile, Claudia's campaign against me became more intense. She arrived at my workplace during lunch and caused a commotion in the lobby. Security had to accompany her out as she screamed that I was a thief and a liar. My manager called me into his office later, concerned about the interruption. I explained the problem and offered documents, but I could see concern in his eyes. She started calling my acquaintances, telling complex stories about my alleged mental health concerns and financial crimes. Some people trusted her and cut me off without even asking for my side. Others contacted out, perplexed by the contradictory narratives. I spent hours on the phone explaining, arguing, and presenting proof. The GoFundMe site continues to expand, reaching over $12,000. Claudia sent regular updates, each one more dramatic than the last. She claimed that I had hacked her bank accounts, stolen her identity, and threatened her safety. The comment section erupted in hatred for me. Then came an unexpected twist. My cousin Adrian, who initially supported Claudia, contacted me discreetly. He'd been appointed as an administrator on the GoFund Me to establish legitimacy given his family reputation for trustworthiness. But when he went to access the funds to assist Claudia in rebooking vendors, he discovered that she had already withdrew the majority of the money. He challenged her and she stated that she needed it for legal bills to fight me, but he had done some research and discovered costs for fancy clothing, lavish dinners, and a weekend spa vacation. When he threatened to expose her, she disabled his admin access and barred him across all platforms. Adrian sent me screenshots of everything, even the bank records he had accessed before being shut out. We calculated that Claudia had spent more than $6,000 of the given funds on herself while still begging for more online. I met with my lawyer again and added fraud accusations to our countersuit. She was enthusiastic about our possibilities, especially because Adrian was eager to testify, but she told me that Claudia would become increasingly desperate as the walls closed in. She was correct. 2 nights later, I awoke to the sound of broken glass. My living room glass had been damaged by a brick with a letter attached. Drop the case or worse will happen. I quickly called the police, and this time they took it seriously because of the escalation and previous reports. My neighbor's security camera definitely showed Claudia throwing the brick. Despite her attempts to hide herself with a sweatshirt, the police detained her that morning and charged her with vandalism, harassment, and criminal threatening. My parents called and begged me to drop the accusations, but I declined. It had gone too far. Claudia spent the night in jail before my parents bailed her out. The terms of her release included no communication with me, but I knew that wouldn't stop her. I placed security cameras throughout my property and changed all of my locks. I altered my routine by driving different routes to work and buying at different stores. The familial schism deepened. Some families switched sides after seeing evidence of Claudia's deceit and brutality. Others dug in deeper, saying that I had provoked her somehow. Family gatherings became impossible. My mother stopped speaking to me completely, but my father called every now and again to check on my safety. Claudia's ex-fiancé, Daniel, contacted her again, offering to testify about her behavior, if necessary. During their breakup, he discovered further lies, such as credit cards she had opened in his name, and money she had stolen from their joint savings account. He was bringing his own legal case against her. Claudia's behavior became more erratic as the case progressed. She harassed me by creating bogus social media accounts, sending me packages containing frightening information, and even attempting to get me fired by filing false complaints with my employer. Each action was chronicled, contributing to the increasing body of evidence against her. After receiving numerous allegations of fraud, GoFundMe was eventually shut down. Donors demanded refunds, and Claudia faced possible criminal prosecution for wire fraud. Her carefully manufactured victim narrative was dissolving, and with it her support network. One morning, Claudia was waiting for me in the workplace parking garage. She'd lost weight. Her fashionable clothing had been replaced with wrinkled sweats, and her neatly groomed hair now fell limp about her face. She asked me to drop everything, pledging to reimburse the money, repent publicly, and get therapy. I proceeded past her toward my car, but she grabbed my arm. Her claws dug into my skin as she begged, threatened, and pleaded again. Everything was recorded on security cameras. When I finally pulled away and got into my car, she hammered on the windows, shouting that I had wrecked her life. That interaction resulted in her arrest for breaking the restraining order. This time my folks did not bail her out right away. My mother called, sobbing, stating she couldn't recognize her daughter anymore. I felt sympathy for Claudia, but I reminded myself that she had always been like this. The wedding had only just disclosed it. The preliminary hearing on the criminal charges has arrived. I sat in the courthouse accompanied by my lawyer and the few remaining family members who supported me. Claudia entered handcuffed, her lawyer beside her. She appeared smaller, diminished by the consequences of her deeds. The prosecution presented the evidence: graffiti, threats, harassment, and fraud. Claudia's counsel attempted to portray her as a stressed-out bride who had made poor decisions, but the pattern of behavior was too obvious to ignore. The judge set a trial date and upheld the restraining order. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited. Claudia's story had received local attention, but not the sympathetic coverage she had hoped for as a cautionary tale about wedding mania and fraud. Why does Claudia keep pushing things when she is plainly caught? Fake social media, profiles, frightening deliveries, and attempting to get her sister fired. Each step appears more frantic than the last, as if she cannot accept that her strategy failed. I declined to reply, walking hurriedly to my car while Claudia's lawyer proclaimed his client's innocence. The civil suit ran concurrently with the criminal proceedings. Claudia's counterweight was rejected immediately due to the evidence. My defamation and fraud claims proceeded. Her lawyer attempted to negotiate a settlement, but I refused. It wasn't about money anymore. It was about accountability. More terrible information came to light through discovery. Claudia had been intending to utilize me for months prior to the engagement, telling acquaintances she had discovered her wedding piggy bank. She had looked into the most expensive vendor, particularly because she knew I would pay. The cruelty had been premeditated, intended to keep me off balance and obedient. My attorney also discovered a pattern of similar behavior in Claudia's background. Former friends came up with stories about money borrowed but never repaid. Events were wrecked by her demand for attention. Her manipulative behavior has wrecked relationships. I was the latest in a long series of victims, and the first to fight back. As the trials came, Claudia made one final desperate attempt. She made a sad video online apologizing and accepting responsibility for everything. She claimed to have discovered religion, to be undergoing therapy, and to want to make amends. The presentation was convincing to people who didn't know her, but I'd learned to see through her actions. The apology included subtle barbs at me, implying that I had overreacted and that a loving sister would have forgiven her. She declared that she was writing a book about her experience, portraying herself as a reformed bridezilla who had learned significant lessons. My lawyer quickly sent a cease and desist letter for the book, citing pending legal processes and defamation concerns. Claudia responded by saying that I was attempting to stifle her story of redemption. The social media war continued, albeit with less backing for her this time. The criminal trial started on a wet Monday. I testified on the harassment, vandalism, and threats. The prosecutor showed the security footage, texts, and trend of escalation. Claudia's defense centered on portraying her as a lady driven to the brink by wedding stress and family betrayal. During cross-examination, her lawyer attempted to portray me as vengeful for canceling the wedding contracts. I calmly explained that I had just discontinued my financial support after discovering I was being used. I played a recording of Claudia's nasty statements, and the jury's expressions hardened as they heard her true feelings about me. Claudia took the stand in her own defense, crying sweetly as she told her story of sorrow. However, under cross-examination, her story fell apart. She could not explain the fraud, vandalism, or threats. Her emotions changed to wrath as the prosecution pressed her, and flashes of her true nature emerged. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before convicting on all counts. Claudia's face turned white when the decision was read. She stared at me across the courtroom, and for the first time I noticed genuine dread in her eyes. The judge scheduled the sentence for the following month. The civil trial followed shortly thereafter. Claudia had little defense against my claims now that her criminal conviction had been proven. The judge granted damages for defamation and fraud, though I knew I'd never see the money, Claudia having spent it all on her lifestyle and legal fees. More crucially, the judge imposed a permanent restraining order and ordered Claudia to publicly renounce her false remarks about me. She had to apologize on all of the same channels where she had propagated misinformation, admitting to fraud and harassment. It was a minor triumph, but it mattered. Sentencing day came with unexpected drama. Claudia's lawyer offered character witnesses and psychological exams to support probation. Given the escalation and lack of remorse, the prosecutor sought jail time. I gave a victim impact statement explaining how Claudia's actions had affected every element of my life. In the end, the judge sentenced Claudia to 16 months in prison with the chance of early release on good conduct. She also ordered reparations for the damages and required therapy. Claudia sobbed as they dragged her away in handcuffs, continuing to play the victim. My folks were distraught. My mother chastised me for not being more forgiving and allowing the situation to progress to criminal charges. My father was more understanding, but he still mourned for the girl he believed he had raised. Our relationship may never fully recover. Some family members apologized for trusting Claudia's lies. Others remained convinced that I had overreacted. I learned to live with a divided family by focusing on the relationships that had made it through the test. My cousin, Adrian, and I became closer as a result of the incident. Claudia's ex-fiancé Daniel and I occasionally exchanged emails while we both processed the shock of realizing who she truly was. He'd begun treatment to figure out how he'd missed the symptoms. I did the same, going through years of manipulation that I had previously disregarded as sibling behavior. Claudia began sending letters through her lawyer 8 months after being sentenced. They were carefully written to avoid breaking the restraining order while still conveying her anger. She blamed me for everything, even her incarceration and shattered reputation. I forwarded them to my lawyer, but did not respond. The wedding date, which had sparked everything, came and went quietly. I spent the time at home going over old photos of Claudia and myself as children. Before the rivalry, before the manipulation, before she'd learned to see me as a resource rather than a sister, I lamented the relationship we'd never truly had. Life gradually reverted to a new normal, as the state of hypervigilance receded, the security cameras were turned off. I stopped looking over my shoulder constantly. When I walked by, work colleagues stopped whispering. The scandal faded and was replaced by other dramas. But the encounter had affected me completely. I'd learned to spot manipulation, set limits and value myself above what I could supply for others. The thousands of dollars I'd lost on wedding deposits felt insignificant in comparison to the lessons I learned. I began volunteering with the domestic violence charity, sharing my experiences with others who had experienced financial and emotional abuse from family members. Many people were astonished to find that abuse did not necessarily originate from romantic partners and that family might be just as harmful. A year after the trials, I learned that Claudia had been freed early for good behavior. The restraining order remained in effect, but I was still nervous. I strengthened my security precautions and notified my workplace, but weeks went by without incident. Then I discovered from family chatter that Claudia had relocated across the nation, stating she sought a fresh start where no one knew her story. She had legally changed her name and was working at a tiny boutique. Part of me hoped she had actually learned and changed. The majority remained suspicious. My mother finally contacted me, offering to meet for coffee. We sat awkwardly in a cafe, unsure how to close the distance Claudia had left between us. She acknowledged she had always knew. Claudia could be tough, but had hoped marriage would help her calm down. She apologized for failing to protect me from my sister's darkest tendencies. It was a start, but our relationship would never be the same. Too much had been said and done. But we started having monthly lunches, deliberately avoiding the subject of Claudia while reconstructing what we could of our mother-daughter relationship. Financial recovery took longer than emotional healing. Between legal bills and lost deposits, I had spent over $30,000. Insurance covered some of the vandalism damage, and I would later receive partial recompense, but the majority was simply gone. I gradually rebuilt my finances, becoming more cautious about how I spent money on others. Dating became complicated. How do you tell someone new that your sister is in jail due to a wedding dispute? When do you discuss the restraining order, fraud, or the year of harassment? I learned to be open about my problematic family circumstances while keeping the facts for people who gained my trust. Work improved once the drama subsided. My supervisor, who was originally concerned about the disruptions, became supportive after he understood the complete issue. Colleagues who had distanced themselves following the crisis slowly warmed up again. Professional life has stabilized, but the most difficult thing was learning to trust again. Every new acquaintance, family interaction, and thoughtful gesture from others was viewed with distrust. Was I being used? Were there any ulterior motives? Therapy helped, but the fatigue persisted. 18 months after all started, I received a final communication via legal channels. Claudia had written a letter accepting full responsibility for her conduct, acknowledging the anguish she had caused, and committing to follow the restraining order indefinitely. Her lawyer verified that she was not looking for anything in exchange, only closure. I reread the letter several times, looking for hidden meanings or manipulation, but it appeared real or as genuine as Claudia could manage. I did not respond, but preserved the letter. Maybe someday I'll believe she has changed, perhaps not. The extended family eventually reached a new balance. Holiday celebration.